This video will help you learn everything you need to know about Orianna to succeed. First, I'll be showing you all the rune pages, and then we can go in depth for those of you who are interested. This first one is laning versus easy matchups. If you want to have an impact on the game as early as possible and scale and hit the mid game successfully, this is very good against those easy matchups. If you're playing against some pesky matchups that are a little bit more complicated and you need extra protection against things like Zed, Talon, Fizz, then you're going to go and opt to take Resolve secondary with Bone Plating and Overgrowth for that extra survivability, and you will of course change your armor or MR depending on the matchup. For a little bit of a mid to late game variation, you can instead take Conditioning. This will give you more value from your E and just give you a little bit more effective HP in that mid game. Phase Rush has kind of fallen behind a little bit in recent times just because it's not as useful as Ahri on Orianna. This is very good against a lot of mobility champions that are going to get close to you. You can get away, reposition very easily in teamfights, help you avoid ganks, but it doesn't really give you that laning power that allows you to just completely bully the fuck out of people. So you can still run this page, it's still pretty good. Gathering Storm for the mid to late, and then you have Scaling Health, which is technically more effective the longer the game goes, but if you are playing against something that is a snowballing-esque champion, make sure you're running actual reses. And finally, we have the final Phase Rush page, which is a Scorch variation for more aggressive laning. It still has the Biscuit for extra lane sustain, and Cosmic Insight as well with aggressive shards. So it just really comes down to, do you feel like you need to reposition more often, or do you feel like you could just play through Ahri damage and bully people with your range? That's pretty much the question you're asking yourself. Welcome to the in-depth portion where we explain literally every single rune and why you take them. If you're low elo, I highly recommend Ahri just because it's more consistent and easier to use, and it gives you more impact on the game in general. That is because it has a very low cooldown, is applicable in most of your trades, and also gives you the ability to shield others for larger amounts. The other alternative is Phase Rush, which gives you the ability to easily reposition in fights or escape early ganks, but it doesn't really give you that much damage. It only really becomes more valuable for damage in the mid to late, where you can stay in range for additional combos, making Ahri just more consistent. In terms of the second row, the only really option that we have here is Mana Flow Band because it gives us access to more mana to poke more frequently with or just clear waves with. For third row, we have Transcendence for haste, which gives us more uptime on our utility, and partial CD resets on takedowns, which is really nice. Sometimes you see people go Celerity and Absolute Focus in really niche matchups, but Transcendence is just the most consistent that you can take. It's just basic value. In terms of the final row, Scorch is pretty much best in slot because it gives you immediate value, allows you to affect the early game. Gathering Storm starts to outvalue at 25 minutes, but the question is, are you going to make it the 25 minutes to actually get value out of Gathering Storm? Because you are playing a control mage, and if you're in low elo, those games might just end before you can even influence it. But if you genuinely feel like the game's going to go long enough, Gathering Storm is definitely going to give you more bang for your buck. In terms of secondary pages, we have a lot of options here for inspiration. Magical Footwear gives you a lot of free move speed. It is worth 420 gold for free, but the issue is you cannot buy boots, which is really bad in matchups where you need the reposition against melees, dodge skill shots like Lux Lane. If you are playing against assassins, you can instead opt for the Perfect Timing Stopwatch, which gives you the ability to buy boots, and you can go into a very early Zhonya's if you want. Typically, I don't feel like building Zhonya's and Ori anymore just because we have Seraph Shield on our second item for the most part. So if you are going to be going for a more aggressive variation, then you kind of want to take Biscuit Delivery so that you can stay in lane for longer and get additional max mana cap. You can also run Futures Market so that you hit your item spikes at all given moments, but Biscuit is definitely more consistent for lower end gameplay, and just in general in all gameplay since it gives you more room to make mistakes. Minion DMAT, honestly, this is something that's very specific for cannon wave usage on just reset waves and roam timers. I wouldn't really recommend it on Orianna if you're below Diamond or Masters, and even then you got to be using it effectively to get the full value out of it. In terms of the final row here, Cosmic Insight gives you Summoner Spell Haste, Item Haste. This means that you are getting more uptime on your Ludens. You can get the 10% move speed proc more often. It gives you more uptime on your Seraphs, more uptime on your Zhonya's if you build it. It's just a really great rune, and also gives you additional flash time, additional teleport time, and that is what makes it so valuable. Outside of this, there's really nothing else to take in this row. And then finally, we always pretty much run attack speed. This is so that you can ramp up your passive if you're trading autos, but the real reason is so that we can consistently last hit, push waves. It's just all around the most consistent. If you are in a matchup where you cannot auto, you can consider adaptive, but you should pretty much always be able to go attack speed in a lot of these matchups. Finally, adaptive force, just for the additional poke damage. If you are in a scaling lane where absolutely nothing matters, take scaling health, you get more value since you're already getting resistances from your E. If you're playing against an aggressive AD champion, you take armor. Against a aggressive AP champion, you take magic resist. Very simple. In terms of secondary pages, we have the ability to go conditioning in mid to late game scenarios where you need additional max health or just survivability. This is good against assassins where you aren't very comfortable running the additional sustains, so you can go conditioning. If you're not running conditioning, you'd go bone plating. This is really good against early game champions like Talon, Zed, things they're going to do with 3-hit combos to proc electrocute. You can mitigate a lot of that damage and actually very, very aggressively trade with Ahri if you'd like to do so. Conditioning here is... Sorry, I already said that. Overgrowth gives you permanent max health, which makes you have more effective life pool to work with. And this is really good because you're already getting the resistances from your E, which means that you just have a lot more HP to survive one-shot combos. And that's pretty much it here for the secondary trees. There are some very niche situations where you see people running POM and something like coup de grace cut down. This is like 1% pick rate. This is like specifically for casted matchups or things where they have infinite sustain, like let's say a Tryndamere mid and Viego mid, stuff like that where you just have to have that permanent mana because they'll just fucking out-sustain you, drain tank you forever. You guys don't really have this issue, so I would not really recommend taking this in standard matchups because you will get more value out of Biscuits and Cosmic or just having the bone plating plus Overgrowth. And again, just shards based on what we talked about before. Alright, welcome to the itemization portion. D-Ring is the most consistent item because it gives you effective health, it gives you combat stats. If you're in a lane where you want to be aggressive, D-Ring's great. If you're in a lane where you need to manipulate the wave state more often or just clear out minion waves, Tier Start is really good. This is typically done versus scaling lanes like Veigar, Aurelion, Malzahar, where you're not really going to have kill pressure unless you get jungle ganks or you play perfectly. In terms of best item in the game, we have the Dark Seal here. This is 1300 gold worth of stats for 350 if you get it fully stacked. It's incredibly easy to stack if you're a better player. If you genuinely believe that you're a better player and you deserve to be higher ranked than you are, you should be building Dark Seal. First recall is pretty much always tier just because it gives us infinite mana to work with. That means you can poke, you can wave clear, and it's just going to set up your Archangel as that second item. In terms of early core items, we have the Lost Chapter and Boots. Typically in melee matchups or heavy poke lanes, I like to build Boots so that I can dodge skill shots or maintain my tethering or positioning against those pesky melees like Sylas or Zed, stay out of range. Otherwise, if you're just focusing on wave clear or just doing as much damage as possible with a range advantage and not having to worry about that repositioning, then you can just go Lost Chapter, amp. You don't want to build the Sapphire Crystal first at all. You want to build this last just in case you are making that mistake, because how can you ever run out of mana when you have Tier and Mana Flow Band or Biscuit Delivery? It's just a waste of money early on. In terms of boot optimization, if you are 1 or 2 AP champions on your team, building Sorks is typically your best bet because you're getting more value. They aren't itemizing magic resist against you. Lucidity Boots is a cheaper option for teams that are tankier. If they're building tank items and your team has a lot of AP champions, more than 2, you're not really going to get much value out of the magic pen, so you'd rather have the permanent uptime on your abilities to cast more frequently. And sometimes you can just run this in aggressive matchups against squishies as well, just so you always have the ability to poke. Because 20 ability haste is a lot early game. If you need that uptime, go ahead and do it. Otherwise, you will get more burst damage out of Sorks against squishy teams. If you're playing against something like, let's say, a Syndra, a LeBlanc, a Fizz, and you want to completely gut them because they have absolutely zero respect for themselves, and you too have no respect for them, then build Merc Treads. I played in a tournament recently. I rushed Merc Treads against LeBlanc. I took literally 200 damage from a full combo at level 5. It is completely cringe, overstated item. Take advantage of it. It's broken. In terms of mythic optimization, typically you're pretty much only going to be looking at Ludens versus Liandry's. If you are playing versus 3 squishies or more, Ludens is more valuable due to the magic pin and burst damage optimization. If you're playing against 3 tanks or more, then Liandry's is going to give you more value because, again, this item will give you additional damage based on their health and additional damage based on their health. So 2 HP effects against tanks turns out pretty good. Crown is really only if you're playing versus an assassin mid and assassin jungle, for example, Diana Yassuo, Rengar Zed. Pretty much the only situation where you can build Crown because it doesn't do damage. If you are playing to win and you do not do damage, you will be absolutely fucking useless. Now, the cool thing about 2,800 gold items are that their itemization is really easy. Like, you take a look at this, you can always buy an item, even if you fuck up your recall. You look at Ludens, you make a single mistake after finishing Lost Chapter, it's like, fuck, I can't buy anything. I gotta buy an Amp Tome or a Dark Seal to make up for this. And if you already have those things, then you're just sitting on a bunch of money. Amp Tome on Liandry's is a little bit easier, pretty much always getting a power spike. Rod of Ages is an interesting item that is just completely fucking debilitating. This is good for tank Orianna, but I genuinely feel that most games you're going to need damage optimization, and you should be going Liandry's or Ludens. This is really if your team has enough damage, and all you need to do is survive lane phase, survive mid-game, go ahead and go Roa. I've played against a couple Roa Oriannas, and my god was it fucking boring though. Now here's a realistic core build versus squishies, and a realistic core build versus 3 tanks. And then we'll go into each item segment at a time. So here for second item, it pretty much is always going to be Seraphs, just because it has some of the best stats that you can ask for on Orianna. The mana is a big one, being able to cast consistently, the additional ability haste, the additional ability power, and again, the flat AP that you're getting out of this item, the little bit of survivability you get from the health, the shield itself on the upgraded variant. It's just a really good item in all situations. If you are skipping Seraphs, you're still going to sit on the tier, obviously, but against squishy teams where you do not need survivability, you should be building Shadow Flame or Rabadons instead for the flat AP, and the magic penetration from Shadow Flame is very good as well, because you'll be at 49 MPen against a bunch of players who are not building Amar. Sometimes you're absolutely omega fucked. If you did not go Crown, then go Zanya second. If you went Crown first and you go Zanya second, then you do not deserve to be looking at this guide. In terms of third item and on, if you are going the standard build of Seraph second, Void Staff is typically going to be best in slot. You can watch my video about Void Staff versus Shadow Flame. But third item is typically completed around the 25-minute mark and so forth, which means everyone has natural MR growth, and you're pretty much always going to be getting more value from Void Staff. Now, there are very unique situations where you are going to get more value from a Shadow Flame if you're playing against 4 squishy champs or 5 squishy champs. In that situation, knowing that you can build Shadow Flame instead will actually give you a lot more value. But if you're playing against anybody who has natural MR growth, which is mostly melees and tanks, Void Staff third is super fucking sweet. Now, the nice thing about AP on Archangel Staff is that you can always go Rabadon's third for the additional AP stacking, but the thing with building Rabadons is this thing is fucking expensive, and if you do not reset with 1250 gold, then you're basically bricked, because you have to sit in base or just keep farming until you hit that next rod. But you take a look at Void Staff, very cheap itemization, Shadow Flame, just as much. It's like if you were going to build Rabadons and you fuck up on the second rod reset, you can just go into Shadow Flame since you already have the first rod. Zanya's third is sometimes acceptable if you're playing against a bunch of assassins that are diving in the backline. You already have the HP sustain from Archangels, but it does give you another layer of protection if you want a damage mythic like Liandry's or Ludens. In terms of fourth item, it's really just completing whatever you haven't built before. If you went Void third, you'd go Rabadons or a defensive item. If you went Rabadons, you would always go Void Staff. And then your final item is pretty much whatever's left and is based on context. Once again, guys, there is a guide. I have an entire spreadsheet on matchups that also includes the itemization, pathing, and why it's done. You can check that out in the description below. What's going on, guys, and welcome to the ability overview and the combos portion of this guide. The first thing we need to talk about is Clockwork Windup, which is Orianna's passive. Orianna's abilities originate from her ball. Orianna's ball automatically returns to her if she's too far away from it, so there's a couple ways to pick the ball up. So, for example, number 1, there's a color indicator to show you when you're about to reset the ball, and a range indicator. I walk past this line, ball resets. Another example is I can queue to myself and pick up the ball manually. Alternatively, I can walk over the ball to pick it up. Alternatively, I can use my E, Alt-E, to pull the ball to me and reset it that way. The second portion of Clockwork Windup is her auto attack enhancer. When she autos a target, after the first auto, every ramping hit will add more damage. So basically, you max out after 3 autos. Which is nice, because mid to late game, it does give you a way to add in more damage, and in the early game, you can get quite a few autos using the move speed slow from Dissonance. which is really, really cool. Anyway, something that we need to talk about here is that Orianna can cast spells while moving, so it doesn't really... She's very, very easy to kite with in this capacity because I never have to actually walk into the enemy to QW. I do a lot of coaching sessions, and I'll see my people go for a QW on this target dummy, and they'll keep moving into melee range instead of recognizing the fact that I could throw my QW and walk away before the ball even lands. Therefore, we're never putting myself in harm's way. But command attack is the bread and butter of Orianna because it enables you to reposition the ball, and again, all your spells originate from where the ball is. So over here, ball's on me, instead it'll W from me. On a teammate, RW, exact same thing. So where your ball is, that basically makes or breaks whether you can use certain spells. So, very, very important. There's multiple ways to use command attack. It'll deal damage as it goes through targets or as it hits targets. And anything after the first target will take reduced damage, making it a little bit harder to get AoE damage off. But there's multiple reasons to lead in with either a shallow or a more in-depth Q. So for example here, if I Q in front, I still get the damage, and I'm now putting a slow field in front of them, making it harder for them to run at me as a melee champion. But if I E, sometimes I'm not going to get the damage from pulling it through, whereas if I QW like this behind them, I can now pull it through for the extra damage. We max Q just because it has the lowest cooldown, with ability haste at 2.14, which means I can constantly remove it, making it easy for me to zone people off or find a way to ult or W somebody. Command Dissonance is our second ability, which we max second, and it releases an electric pulse dealing damage to surrounding enemies, as you can see. And it also has a slow field and a speed up, so if I put it down, I can run through it, gives me some speed. And something you'll see players do often is they'll W themselves, run through, and you have to recognize this leaves itself for 2 seconds. So if I throw the ball in front of me, I can get a little bit extra move speed out of it just because I'm not running halfway through it, right? Which is pretty cool. Now, you can also use it as a slow to disengage, so if I throw it in front of the opposition, I have to run through with 50% slow. And of course it scales based on level. It makes it harder for people to engage into you. So if you're getting ganked, you can technically throw the ball in front, make them run through it, or you could just basically W, run away, and have them run through that slow field afterwards. But if I throw my QW behind them, and they dash into me out of the slow field, I'll suddenly be like, why the fuck did my slow do nothing there? It's just because they've already exited the range for the most part, using their mobility. Something to be mindful of is whether you're casting in front or behind, as we've talked about. Command Protect is one of the coolest abilities on Orianna because it gives resistances to yourself or your ally. So right now the ball is on me, I get 6 armor, 6 magic resist. Ball is off of me, I lose those stats. I can put onto a target dummy. My ADC, for example, they are now tankier, harder to kill, gives them more survivability, which is very, very cool. Now, when you attach the ball to somebody, they get a shield, which protects them from damage, which also gives the airy bonus. Or I can use it to do damage if I pull it through enemies. So if I throw it behind the target dummy and pull it through, I get damage. So again, if I QW in front to disengage and then pull back, I'm not getting damage. But if I QW behind and then pull through, I'm getting that extra bit of damage. And then of course the shield and the extra resistances to disengage with. If you're playing Phase Rush, this is a very easy 3-hit combo. Whereas if you don't have Phase Rush, you don't have to really worry about that extra hit. But Command Protect also has a faster projectile speed, so for example here, if I have the ball all the way over here, and Q, it takes a long time, right? Put the Q back, you watch it this time, it's almost 400 to 500 units faster, making it very easy to reposition with. Now, I'm going to run back just a little bit. I want to talk about the Q, which is going through targets does damage, right? So here, you can see that most people are in the habit of clicking directly onto the target dummy to do damage, because they think I just have to hit the target. So most people will instead click here, and then walk into the enemy. But another cool thing that you can do here is you can cast it through. So I could literally cast on myself, and pull it through the target without actually being in range to do so. So again, if I look at this objectively, I'm nowhere in range to hit this, but if I Q over here, I'm sending it through the target dummy without actually being in range to hit the target dummy with the actual Q effect. Now, I won't be able to W, but I'm still getting free chip damage on a very low cooldown spell. And finally, we have Command Shockwave, which is the funnest part of our kit. When you unleash your Shockwave, you're dealing damage to everyone around it and knocking them in the direction of the ball. This is the keyword here. If I put the ball in front of them, it's going to hit them or knock them back in the direction of the ball. So it's going to pull them towards me. Now, if it's behind them, it's going to pull them away from me. So if my goal is to continue and engage, let's say I lead in with QW, and I pull them towards me, I can now get in another combo. I'm getting ganked, they're running at me, I need to disengage the fight, I throw the ball behind them, and pull them away from me, giving me more space to run away with. So there's a lot of utility usage in that, and of course if I just throw to my ally, it doesn't really matter what the direction is. But if you're thinking optimally about how to use it, you can pull them into your teammates, or you can pull them away from your teammates, and that makes you a much, much better Orianna than the average player. So again, pulls towards the ball, put it behind, pulls it towards the ball again, away. So think about how you want to use that, and of course we're going to do a quick combo portion. If you're level 1, it pretty much just comes down to using your Q in creative ways by pulling it through, or just hitting the target with it directly. After that, you hit level 2, you have access to your W, you want to be able to use the command dissonance on top of the ball, which means you actually have to hit the target now. If you cast in front, you're creating the protective field. If you cast it behind, you're making it harder for them to run away because they have to move through the slow. So you can use that aggressively as well. So if they're trying to run away, you get free autos in the whole time. And of course, this also means you can pull the ball through when you're level 3, getting access to that additional damage in that capacity. A full extended combo for Orianna looks a little bit like this. You're going to QW in front. You're going to pull them through the ball using your ultimate. You're going to pull the E through and then QW again. And that typically does a shit ton of damage. So my goal typically in most lanes is to get them to anywhere between 60 to 70% HP, and then once you land that QW that puts them to 50% HP, you just re-engage using the ultimate knockback and then follow up with more spells. And that is Orianna in a nutshell. If you are interested in laning examples of Orianna, I have hundreds of videos in the low elo, the mid elo, the high elo. Definitely recommend checking those out as they are a great resource. I explain my thought process, what exactly I'm trying to punish. And Orianna is a fun champion. If I had to rank her, I'd say that she's probably a B+. I don't think she's the best solo queue champion just because she lacks agency, but it does feel good to play a champion that has solo impact, but is also utility and enables others to succeed. So if you do a queue with a jungle or something like that, they might enjoy playing with an Orianna. But thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please make sure to subscribe, and you can check me out playing Orianna live on Twitch at twitch.tv/Zianni. Remember to meow if you watched the whole way through. Thank you so much. Have a good night.